My name is Corey Neer. I'm doing this video for my ECE 335 class for assignment for week number 2. Today I will be focusing on the developmental focus of settings throughout the book Owl Moon by Jan Yolen. I'll be focused on the first grade age, and the length of the lesson is about 10 to 15 minutes long. My goal is to point out setting aspects and how they impact the overall story, and the details that are within the settings and how they're made up. The objective is the students will be able to interpret and identify the settings of a story by creating a story map with no more than one detail left out. There are a few standards that go along with this. One is to describe characters, settings, and major events in a story using key details, and the other is use illustrations and details in a story to describe characters, settings, or events. These two go together because it lets them describe and figure out their own experiences and maybe how those two things go together, the book and the pictures and their own knowledge. We'll need a few things for this. One is going to be the book Owl Moon by Jan Yolen. Another one I thought would be fun to do was have a computer so that I can play the owl sounds for them. Maybe a flashlight or a moon or maybe a tree-like object to kind of just bring the book to life to them. A story map for each child and some craft supplies for the end of the story for a activity. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, class. Today we are going to read a story about a really fun animal. This is where I will play the owl sound and ask, does anyone know what kind of bird makes that sound? Owls live in a special place and can usually only be seen at a certain time. Who can tell me what time owls usually wake up? Let's read the story and find out where the owl lives. Listen for the different places and what they are like throughout the story. Right. So, the story is called Owl Moon. It is by Jan Yolen. Owl Moon by Jan Yolen. It was late one winter night, long past my bedtime, when Pa and I went out owling. There was no wind. The trees stood tall as giant statues, and the moon was so bright the sky seemed to shine. Somewhere behind us a train whistle blew, long and low, like a sad, sad song. I could hear it through the woolen cap Pa had pulled down over my ears. A farm dog answered the train, and then a second dog joined in. They sang out, trains and dogs, for a real long time, and when their voices faded away, it was as quiet as a dream. We walked on towards the woods, Pa and I. Our feet crunched over the crisp snow, and little gray footprints followed us. Pa made a long shadow, but mine was short and round. I had to run after him now and then to keep up, and my short, round shadow bumped after me. But I never called out. If you go owling, you have to be quiet. That's what Pa always says. I have been waiting to go owling with Pa for a long, long time. We reached the line of pine trees, black and pointy against the sky, and Pa held up his hand. I stopped right where I was and waited. He looked up, as if searching the stars, as if reading a map up there. The moon made his face into a silver mask, and then he called, "Hoo, hoo," the sound of a great horned owl. "Hoo, hoo, hoo." Again he called out, and then again. After each call he was silent, and for a moment we both listened, but there was no answer. Pa shrugged, and I shrugged. I was not disappointed. My brothers all said sometimes there's an owl, sometimes there isn't. We walked on. I could feel the cold as if someone's icy hand was palmed down on my back, and my nose and the tops of my cheeks felt cold and hot at the same time. But I never said a word. If you go owling, you have to be quiet and make your own heat. We went into the woods. The shadows were the blackest thing I had ever seen. They stained the white snow. My mouth felt furry, for the scarf over it was wet and warm. I didn't ask what kinds of things hide behind those black trees in the middle of the night. When you go owling, you have to be brave. Then we came to a clearing in the dark woods. The moon was high above us. It seemed to fit exactly over the center of the clearing, and the snow below it was whiter than the milk in a cereal bowl. I sighed, and Pa held up his hand at the sound. I put my mittens over the scarf over my mouth and listened hard. And then Pa called, "Hoo, hoo, hoo, hoo." I listened and looked so hard my ears hurt, and my eyes got cloudy with the cold. Pa raised his face to call it again, but before he could open his mouth, an echo came threading its way through the trees. "Hoo, hoo, hoo." Pa almost smiled. Then he called back, "Hoo, hoo," just as if he and the owl were talking about supper, or about the woods, or the moon, or the cold. I took my mitten off, the scarf off my mouth, and I almost smiled too. The owls came closer, and from high up in the trees on the edge of the meadow. Nothing in the meadow moved. All of a sudden, an owl shadow, part of the big tree shadow, lifted off and flew right over us. We watched silently, with heat in our mouths and the heat of all the words we had not spoken. The shadow hooted again. Pa turned on his big flashlight and caught the owl just as it was landing on a branch. For 1 minute, 3 minutes, maybe even 100 minutes, we stared at one another. Then the owl pumped its great wings and lifted off the branch like a shadow without sound. It flew back into the forest. "Time to go home," Pa said to me. I knew then I could talk. I could even laugh out loud. But I was a shadow as we walked home. When you go owling, you don't need words or warm or anything but hope. That's what Pa says, the kind of hope that flies on silent wings under a shining owl moon. And that's the end of the story Owl Moon. The lesson development in this was that we read the story. We were looking for all the different changes in each scene. How in one scene she could see a large shadow. In one scene she felt fear because she could see a large black shadow of a tree. Another scene she was cold but she could feel the heat. So that meant that there was probably snow and it was chilly outside. Explaining that every story has its setting and how that helps it make sense. Obviously, you wouldn't find an owl at the beach. Explain the story map and have them get into groups of 2 or 3 children and have them fill out the chart and then come back together as a class and find out from different groups how many setting changes there were and what each consisted of and what the details were in each one. If I have any gifted learners, I could have them draw out the scenes while the others are writing them and speaking out loud. For ELL, I could have like fake snow or a moon hanging from the ceiling to kind of explain those words and give them a familiar way to cope and understand. And for remediation, allowing children with problems reading or writing to be paired with students that will help them with those skills, or maybe allow them to do other things. Instead of reading or writing, maybe they can be the speaker at the end that shares everything with the class. For my assessment, I have chosen to do a hat that has strips of settings from the story found in it. Each group will pull one sentence or phrase, and it will say like the large tree that was casting a shadow that made her have to be brave. Then they'll be able to make that however they want to make it, whether that's Play-Doh with fabric, crayons and paper, whatever they're really feeling. And then as a class, I'll have the students explain and display their setting creation, and have each group tell how the settings of that story kind of impacted the story and how it enhanced what was going on, how that picture really involved into the story and the words and the things that were happening in the story. It really brought out the plot and told about the characters and just things like that. And then people from outside their group may be able to add on a little bit to those. And then I would just summarize that settings really impact what will happen and how they will happen, where the story takes place, how the story changes throughout. Do they end up in the same spot? Do they go somewhere new? What they see there, what they feel there. And then I will just display their artwork and definitely just make sure that each child was able to be hands-on and show all the things that I was looking for. Basically the attention to detail, and just make sure that they're seeing what I'm meaning by setting and what all that entails.